Welcome agents. Whilst the full patch notes for Title Update 3.0 have yet to be revealed, it's very clear some major changes are being made to almost every aspect of the game, from time to be killed, time to kill, to talent requirements and a lot more. Now, with a lot of people focusing on what they perceive as negative changes, I want to go against the meta and talk about some of the best features coming with Title Update 3.0, which is coming out next week. Now, not all of you are going to agree with me, and that's fine, so I encourage you to leave your thoughts down below and leave a like whilst you're there. Please remember to turn on notifications after you have subscribed for dedicated Division content, and with that said, let's begin. Okay, so let's start off with the gear score not being increased to 515 any longer with this update. Now, if you remember back a couple of weeks ago, Red Storm came on and talked about PvP, and one thing they said was that 515 gear would only be available in the occupied Dark Zone. I made a video following this saying bad idea, and as you can imagine, the community were pretty much up in arms. PvE players because they didn't want to be forced into playing potentially PvP, which is fair enough, and PvP players as well because they just didn't want to go into the occupied Dark Zone, and I think everyone had a right to be mad. Now, following that, the devs came out and said we were wrong. Actually, it's going to be PvE as well that will be able to drop 515 gear, like level 4 control points, heroic missions and whatnot. But they've gone against that and they decided, you know what, we're going to stick to 500 gear because that's probably the best way to make sure that this update comes out without basically reducing everyone's hard work to nothing. And I think it was a good change for a couple of reasons. Now, firstly, like all of you, I've been grinding the game for 500 gear score weapons and gear since launch, and I have a very full stash, some of that we can talk about in another video, and inventory at this point. Now, with the recent news of changes being made to armor, health, talent attributes and more, I've been trying to get a build that I could use once the patch drops and in time for the raid, which I think will be coming out the week commencing May 20th. Now, to have all of that playtime, min-maxing, build-making kind of thrown out of the window for a 15 gear score increase would have been very disappointing and frustrating, especially when you consider that you won't have very long to farm before the raid actually drops. Now, that's not to say I don't want a gear score increase ever, because I think it's a pretty natural progression within games like this, and that's fine, but generally, when these gear score increases are introduced, I'd expect quite a substantial increase, so you actually feel like you are getting more powerful. Now, there's the argument that gear score really means nothing in the Division 2, which I agree with, but we're going to be forgetting about that for the point of this topic. A 15 level gear score increase would have provided a very minute increase in power, so small in fact, you wouldn't have seen a difference, as the top end would have maybe increased by half a point, maybe 1 point maximum. Now, I think the devs made the right choice here. There are a couple of questions going around about this change that I wanted to answer, if that's okay. Now, firstly, if you have gear that is currently over 515 because you've recalibrated it, what will happen to that gear? Now, as far as I'm aware, your gear will be reverted back to their state before recalibration. So, for example, you had a 498 piece of gear and you recalibrate it to 515, it will go back to 498. Now, secondly, what's the point in playing the raid if none of the gear will drop higher? And that could be said for heroic missions and whatnot. Well, the devs have confirmed there will be raid-specific gear sets, and there's going to be a new exotic assault rifle. We don't know exactly what this exotic assault rifle is, we just know it's coming. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of sort of vanity items or new vanity items, combinations, and other things to collect as well. What I'm trying to say is that we don't need an increase in gear score to make the raid worth your while, and I think that the devs have made the right choice here. Moving on, and importantly, the Dark Zone is getting much needed changes that should mean it's much more populated and viable. And I put out a post a couple of days ago asking about the possibility of a PvE Dark Zone, something that's been going around in the community for some time. Now, I'm not going to touch upon that in this video, but if you guys do want me to touch upon that, then I want you to leave a comment down below about that, among other things. I personally, without going into it, my synopsis is no, but we can discuss that in another video. Now, the devs confirmed that there was too much non-contaminated loot, meaning people were just farming the Dark Zone without any risk, skipping the fundamental reason the Dark Zone exists at all. Now, thankfully, this is changing, so contaminated loot will be much more rife, meaning people will have to engage in, actually extracting loot and playing the Dark Zone how it was intended. The increase in contaminated loot from bosses and challenge landmarks means that both PvE and PvP players will be rewarded with the most optimized gear in the game, if they are willing to take on the risk of possibly losing their loot to rogue players. Now right now the Dark Zone is pretty casual, but this change alone should mean that anyone who is in the Dark Zone knows of the high risk of being there and has chosen to accept that risk. That is what the Dark Zone is all about. Now another good change is the reduction in Dark Zone brackets. Right now there are numerous Dark Zone brackets. I believe there's 3 or 4 within levels 1 to 30 and possibly more when you go above that. So this means they'll be cut down from numerous to just 2, because I don't know exactly how many there are at this point. So there will just be 2 in update 3.0, and these will be levels 1 to 30 and players in world tiers. Now this will ultimately mean these 2 brackets are a lot more populated, reducing the chance of you joining a server with very few players in. It's worth remembering that for 2 of the 3 Dark Zones, it is normalised to gear score 500, meaning you could be a level 3 and compete with someone who is level 27 within that bracket. The only advantage a level 27 could possibly have is certain talents or gear, but it should be pretty even in most instances. Of course, the occupied Dark Zone is not normalised, so you will likely not want to enter there until you are max gear score to avoid being stomped. Now talking of the occupied Dark Zone, the devs confirmed a separate PvP modifier, meaning that you will not be shredded instantly anymore, so builds will become important now, especially when you consider the changes coming to armor, health and the talent changes. Now the devs did confirm that the Red Rogue and Manhunt status will be coming to the occupied Dark Zone, but not with update 3.0. But this is something the community has been asking for since launch. Overall, the changes to the normalised Dark Zone are welcome, and the occupied DZ is moving closer to the Division Day 1 Dark Zone so many people wanted it to be. Next up, we have some major changes and a new feature to the Recalibration station in the form of a new Recalibration score. Now the devs have revealed that recalibrating will no longer increase your gear score, but instead increase your recalibration score depending on how optimized your gear is. Now the recal score will be from 0 to 100, 0 being the lowest and of course 100 being the highest, the most optimal. Now this is a good change because now you'll be able to see how optimized your gear is, which is important as you try and min-max your gear as much as possible. Now to increase your recal score, you will need to swap attributes from another piece of gear to the gear you want it to be transferred to, and that attribute would need to be higher of course than what's on your current gear. In the live game, you will notice that most of the time when you want to transfer over attributes, there will be a very low max transfer amount. For example, you might have a 14% headshot damage on a chest piece and you want to transfer, and it might only allow you to transfer say 6%. Well, the new recal changes mean that most of the time, not always, but most of the time, this will no longer be the case, and you will now be able to transfer the whole amount, which is a very positive change and one I was really happy to see. It's one of the main reasons I don't really use the recalibration score in recalibration station, in its current form. Now my tip would be to keep any high roll attributes for the update. In fact, the DSD West vendor, as of me making this video and it going live, is currently selling a Petrov chest piece that has 929 skill power, which is very, very high. So I'd recommend getting a few of those for the update. Now, of course, this whole process will still require some form of RNG, which could be a good or bad thing depending on what you want as a person. For me, I need something to grind for in a game like this. So I like that RNG plays a role in how optimized your gear is, but I'm not sure my opinion would be the majority here. It's just what I like. Anyway, the recal changes are moving in the right direction, and I think I will finally use the recal in update 3.0 and feel like I'm actually progressing my builds forward rather than backwards. Last but certainly not least has to be the changes coming to PvP. Now a huge proportion of the player base are not playing the game right now because of PvP, which is a real shame, but hopefully the changes coming will change all of that, and I think there are some positive changes here. Now firstly, the PvP modifier has been reduced from 70% to 40%, meaning that the time to kill will be significantly increased. There is the worry that the time to kill might be too high, especially when you consider the changes to armor and health, but having read through a lot of the PTS posts on the Ubisoft forums, I only once saw a post about time to kill being too high. So either people were not testing, or they generally just weren't talking about it, or the general consensus is that it's not a problem. Of course, The PvP modifier can be adjusted on a whim, so it's not that big of a deal, but other changes coming are very welcome, like the nerfs to both the damage boost and the armor boost. These have both been nerfed by 50%, which is a step in the right direction. Now, the biggest change indirectly linked to PvP has to be that normalized stats will now be scaled up to the maximum 500 gear score, meaning we should see a lot more variety in builds. Spec into only DPS, you should be a glass cannon, or spec into only defensive attributes, you should be a tank. Now, the skill damage modifier has been increased from 20% to 25%, which again is a positive move in the right direction. And assault rifles will now have a 1.25% PvP damage scaler instead, meaning they should be a much more viable option within PvP. Again, another good change in trying to balance the effectiveness of all weapon archetypes within PvP. Other changes to skills like the Defender Drone and certain meta talents means that PvP should allow for some much more better build diversity, much better engagements, and more importantly, PvP should feel more fun and more rewarding. Title Update 3.0 is going to be huge. The full patch notes will likely be revealed tomorrow, and I'm expecting some stuff we have no idea about right now, so let's hope the devs took all of the best feedback from the PTS and implemented them into this update. There is no doubt that the Division 2 is leagues ahead of the Division in what it has to offer, but the devs need to make sure they pull this off. Now, I'm optimistic, and I think for all the negative things people have to say, there's 3 more people saying something positive. Positivity will make this game great, not toxic negativity on stream and the bashing of developers. If you want to make a positive impact on the game, be positive and offer constructive criticism like an adult without the verbal abuse and disrespect. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this one, and thanks for sticking around until the end. Epic out.